All right, hey, welcome to example 8. In this one, we can take a look at the constraint type that is spring. There's a different type, as I said, for constraints. One is glue, that we looked at before. And now we're going to have a look at spring and add that into our arsenal of stuff to do with RBD. So this is a very basic example. I'm just going to do a spring constraint between two boxes and see what happens when I let them simulate. So to start off, I'm just going to add a box, transform it up. I'm going to do a transform here. I'm going to pack both boxes like that with the assemble sub. I'm going to add some attributes. I'm going to add a name attribute in a string type called piece0. I'm going to add an active attribute to 0 for this box. And then the other box, I'm going to add the name attribute piece1 and the active attribute set to 1. Which means that this box is going to be active, this box is going to be inactive. And both boxes looks like this. Now, I need to add a constraint between these two. And how I can do this is with a simple line that is basically just going to connect both of the centers of these spheres, like this. On this line, I'm going to add the usual attribute called constraint name, constraint type. The constraint name this time is going to be a string. Make sure it's a class and a type spring attribute, string, and the string attribute is called spring. It's a little bit confusing there, but it's a spring attribute, string attribute, and the string attribute is called a spring, and the constraint type is called all. So that's our constraint network and our geometry, and everything is fine. So let's go into the .NET and see what happens in there. So in the .NET, I bring both of these in. I put them on the bullet solver, and I'm just going to disable this for a little bit and go to the gravity and see what happens. So one box falls down and one stays the same. Now, if I locate the constraint I just put and I activate the constraint network, and we can disable this, we can see that we now have this. We're going to add a spring constraint relationship into the second input, green to green, and then this is going to show up. This is a little bit different from earlier, right? The spring constraint guides are a little bit different, but that's fine. There's a lot of different options here as well. There's damping, for example, which is a new one, which is how fast the energy in the spring is consumed and how fast they go back to a normal state. There's also strength, which is the same as before, and rest length is like the rest length of the spring, like how big it is from the beginning. Yeah, so again, this is a very simple example of a spring constraint. We're gonna look at a little bit more advanced examples later on, even in the next example, but yeah. So let's put the geometry back on and let's go to output and let's play this and see what happens. So it slides down and boom. You can see it kind of bounces up and down a little bit. And if we do the strength back to 1000 for the spring, you see it goes even further. And it acts even more as a spring, like that. Which is kind of interesting. Again, if we bump up this to 10,000, but we put the damping to 10, we can get some other interesting result. We'll get more bouncy. It will never really calm down as much, which is kind of cool as well. It bounces, interacts, and like hits the surface of this inactive box. So yeah, that's kind of how spring constraint works. Kind of characteristics of it. You can get some really nice bending in materials with this constraint, especially when you have a lot of them. You can't really see it when you only have one constraint like this, but when you have thousands of them and they're acting on a big chunk of debris, it can look really, really incredible. Especially when you switch between glue and spring. That's also a future thing that we're going to take a look at, how to switch between constraints and how to we'll talk about it more later, but it's really, you can do a lot with these, right? And you can get a lot of like really cool behaviors. But yeah, this is basically how Spring, the most basic form of it, works. And I hope you guys learned something, and I'll see you guys in the next example. Thank you.